Plus. Hiya, baby. You want to be in a video? How would you like to be in a video? Maybe we'll just let you wander around in the video. People will say, I want to see the video with the cat. They won't even remember what I was saying. Are we on? Okay. Hi, Dexter here. And I'm going to be talking about power processing and John McMasters, who was the person most responsible for developing power processing. So first of all, what is power processing? Those who have experienced it tend to describe power processing as the best thing they ever experienced, or one of the best things they ever experienced in Scientology. And what does power processing do? Well, exactly what power processing does is it follows a pattern that first became part of Dianetics in June 1950, about a month after the Dianetics book was published, where the command was arrived at and developed successfully. The file clerk will now give us the incident necessary to resolve the case. What is meant by that is the incident, the thing that happened that has the most impact, the most influence, most dominates the being's consciousness at this time. So naturally, if you successfully resolve that, you're doing something. And power processing commands, the processes actually, you can see some very similar worded commands around 1955. You could look up the lectures. That's a subject for another discussion. But I've seen very similar processes that were developed right around 1955. So I would call those processes the precursors to what became known as power processing. And the beginning of power processing has much to do with John McMasters. John McMasters was a very important person at the time of the early 1960s and mid-1960s in Scientology in terms of furthering the advancement and development of processes. He became known as the Pope of Scientology in the 60s, and he was given the glory number of clear number 1, although there's evidence that he actually wasn't the first person through the process to be certified. But because of his importance, he was given that designation. I recommend listening to John McMasters' lectures. I have learned so much about auditing in general, and anybody could from that. Very valuable information. One of the most valuable pieces of information was when John McMasters explained that people asked him, what was it about his model session that made it so much better? What was that knack he had that made his auditing so much more effective? And McMasters explained that he thought about this and realized that what it was that he was not doing anything other than giving the question or the command, being there with the other person, the pre-clear, and awaiting the answer. He was not having thoughts, evaluating what the PC was doing, how they were running, or concerns about that. He was just simply being there with the pre-clear. And that was the outstanding thing that made the auditing special. There are many contributions John McMasters made, which I'll go into a little bit of one or two of those. But specifically regarding power processing, such a magnificent development. It's interesting how this came about. And McMasters has recounted how one day at St. Hill, Ron Hubbard was in the middle of a conversation with someone, and some other guy was walking by and came up and really wanted to have a conversation with Ron, and just burst in the middle of the conversation and started saying what he had to say, interrupting. And Ron was not pleased. But he handled the situation well enough, and then he kind of whispered to McMasters to run this man on these 3 commands. And John McMasters had no idea where those commands came from. But nevertheless, he took this guy in session and ran him on those commands. Now, it turned out that one of the three commands turned out to be ineffectual and was later dropped. But essentially, what was being run for the first time that we have recorded, the basic conditions process, which later became known as Power Process 6, but this is the core power process. And as it was issued in the church, is the following two commands. Tell me an existing condition, and then tell me how you've handled it, alternate, repetitive. And we'll go into explaining more about that. But that was the beginning of power processing, and that is the core process of power processing. Now, as things developed, other processes were developed to enhance Preclear's ability to successfully run power processing. What's happening in power processing on these two commands, tell me an existing condition and tell me how you've handled it, the Preclear will come up with one condition after another, which always relates to an incident. And every condition that he names will actually be related. And unlike in Dianetics, where you go earlier and earlier and earlier, in power processing, there's no command as to which way to go on the time track, which is a very good thing, because the truth is, if you study the book Dianetics, or the time track in general relating to the reactive mind, the time track in the reactive mind is not at all organized in a chronologically linear order. It's not in a linear chronological sequence. And that's what's wrong with any set of engram running commands that send you earlier and earlier and earlier. That's not the way the bank is organized. If it was so correctly organized in linear sequence, it wouldn't be the bank. So this process, tell me an existing condition, tell me how you've handled it, allows for what's called cycling on the track. The Preclear will go up and down, wherever he needs to go next, because this material is organized however it happens to be organized in the bank. And now we're allowing the file clerk, which is that instinct, to look exactly where one needs to look, to go to find exactly what needs to be found, and thus unpeel the incidents, the conditions, in the layers in which they just happen to be randomly or otherwise organized in the reactive mind. Now, these two commands, tell me an existing condition and tell me how you've handled it, this is very interesting, because you're not going to read in anything issued on power processing by the church. And I haven't seen it said by John McMasters or anyone else either, but from my own experience and research, this became obvious to me, is that this order of commands and these particular commands, tell me an existing condition, tell me how you've handled it, we're actually employing a technique known as effort processing. And we're running out the forces that are behind these conditions. You've got efforts and you've got counter efforts. And when you run efforts and counter efforts, it's known as effort processing. So on tell me an existing condition, you are running an effort from the environment towards the Preclear ordinarily. And then when you say tell me how you've handled it, now the Preclear is running his counter effort to that effort, how he's handled it. It does not mean terminatedly resolved it, the Scientology policy sense of the word handled. It simply means how did the Preclear respond to that. It can be with a thought, it can be with an emotion, it can be with an effort, but in any case it is some form of effort in response to the condition. And in running this, you enable the Preclear to go deeper and deeper to the next incident and the next condition. To explain this in more detail, we're reducing the forces underneath which lie the postulates, and ahead of them the evaluations which prompted the postulates. The openness of the non-specific commands allow the file clerk to scan freely to deliver the material most prominent in imposing on the PC's consciousness, and thus deliver the incident necessary to resolve the case. Now, at some point in the process of running this, something very interesting occurs. It's called revivification. At some point, you hit a basic incident, the anchor to which all these other incidents are weighed together and connected. And what revivification is the moment when that pre-clear is in that basic incident completely, and he perceives the environment as now. So if the incident involves great heat, the pre-clear is going to tell you how hot it is. If the incident involves frustration, the pre-clear may tell you how frustrated he is with the process. It's really quite interesting to observe. But when you see this shift of attitude and tone level, and your experience with this, when you're seeing a revivification begin. And all you need to do is be there with the pre-clear and experience it. No matter how lively it is dramatized, that's where the pre-clear is really running it out. And this can take any length of time. As John McMasters noted, a revivification can take place and be over with in less than a second. It can also go on for some time. But it runs out, and the typical reaction might be something like, I don't know what it is, but something is gone, and I feel serene, I feel very calm. Or they might be able to give you more material about what's gone. But it's a most interesting change, and it's a huge change. And at that point, you allow the pre-clear to express whatever they have to express. And then you just end the session, because something very interesting is going to continue to happen. If you visualize a chain of engrams, a chain of related incidents, as a structure within the reactive mind, sort of like a building. Well, when you get to this basic incident and the revivification happens, and then the pre-clear, one way or another, words, it's all gone. They may also word that they see how they are completely causative and created whatever it was they experienced. That's also very common. And but an interesting thing will go on to happen for any amount of hours or days after that, which a friend of mine who helped me to understand all this better and worked on this with me calls percolating, and that's a good word for it. You see, if you have this idea that it's a structure or a building, okay, well, what you've just done is, what you want to do is to deconstruct this building in the bank. It's got a lot of weight and pressure and effect on the pre-clear. You want to deconstruct it, and that's what you're doing when you're getting the pre-clear to run out the efforts and the counter efforts, and then revivify and then completely run out that basic incident. And essentially, it's like what's happening is you have just used some dynamite to blow up the foundation of that building. And that building is coming crashing down. And that's what happens at the end of the revivification. But then you have this phenomena we could call percolating. What's happening is, the building is still crashing down. The pre-clears have this experience, and they're very changed by it. But what's going to happen, most likely, for days afterwards, is that little bits and pieces of that building, a window from the 3rd floor and a door from the 7th floor and a bit of the ceiling from the 4th floor, little bits and pieces of feelings and efforts and emotions and images from all those related incidents are going to blow on inspection. They're going to come up for a moment, and there's going to be feelings or sensations that are going to run out very quickly and further increase and improve the pre-clear's sense of being in present time, sense of well-being and change, and improve their perceptions. So you always want to allow at least a few days before taking the PC back in session after that phenomena is reached. And what I do is I let the pre-clear tell me, verify that they're ready to go back in session. It's quite a thing to observe. So again, what's happening there, the main phenomena at work are, we're going after the incident that is most dominant on the pre-clear's consciousness, and thus will bring about the most change, the most needed change. You're working with the file clerk by not demanding any specific type of incident, that hasn't been voiced already by the pre-clear. You're letting the file clerk do its job and not getting in the way or misdirecting it by telling it to go earlier or in any particular direction. And what we're doing is called paralleling the mind, and it's the most important principle in processing because it's the most effective way to work. And again, the other part of this that you're using is effort processing, because the two commands get the effort and the counter effort, the existing condition and the pre-clear's response to it in the command, tell me how you've handled it. And that's a wonderful experience for any pre-clear. Now, if you understand this much, then you understand that you can run power processing any number of times, because what we've done is handled the incident that is most dominating the pre-clear's consciousness. Having done that, there is the next incident that most dominates after that, and that will present itself and offer itself up if it has the opportunity through running power processing again. Now, in the early days when power processing was being developed, initially there was simply that process. And some pre-clears went through it very quickly, and some pre-clears were really grinding through it. Didn't have the sequence of processing that was later developed, and some people apparently needed that, or it seemed so. So then a process was developed to enhance the running of power. It was come to be used for all pre-clears. And as we said, the core power process is called the conditions process. So then what was developed next became known as the existence process. Again, this was developed to enhance the running of power processing. So this would be run before running power processing. And the commands for the existence process are what is and what isn't. Very simple dichotomy. What is, what isn't. And the idea here, if you understand where these commands take you, is that they're helping the pre-clear to spot and be able to address whatever is presenting itself in their bank in response to the questions used in power processing. What is, what isn't. So the pre-clear has a little more certainty of what they're seeing and is comfortable expressing it. This by itself is a very, very workable and very good process. And pre-clears will have changes on this in itself. Now what's interesting about this, when you run what is, what isn't, sometimes a pre-clear is going to answer with dichotomies. What is life? What isn't? Death. You know, there's a million examples. Hot, cold, you know, whatever dichotomies are offered. But when you see a pre-clear start to give answers of dichotomies, now this is very interesting, and I don't know exactly through what logic or research or experience this became known, but it's a brilliant realization. But when the pre-clear answers in dichotomies, what was discovered that what's happening is that this shows that the pre-clear is stuck in some earlier practice that re-stimulated the dichotomies that are in the bank, that are in the reactive mind. And there's a specific handling if that happens in running the existence process of what is, what isn't. And it's an adaptation of Power Process 6. Tell me an existing condition, tell me how you've handled it, focused on a specific earlier practice. So the way this runs is the pre-clear who is giving these answers of dichotomies on the existence process is told, give me some practices, opinions, or beliefs you've been connected to, whether you left them or not. And then, you know, you get your item. And whatever practice this is, well, let's just say meditation, witchcraft, it doesn't matter. You know, I'm not degrading any other particular practice, but just for the sake of getting some reality on this, they give such an answer. And then you take that item and you essentially modify the commands of the conditions process, and that, let's say the answer was witchcraft, okay? So then you would run, what condition have you encountered in witchcraft? How have you handled it? And then you're running this the same way as you run the conditions process. You're cycling on the track, you're getting the efforts and counter efforts, and what will happen is the PC will have some sort of revivification and come out of the basic incident of this other practice that stuck them into these dichotomies. Now, having done that, you can then go back and you can run the existence process again, what is, what isn't, which may or may not have gotten its end result on doing what you just did. And then you can run back to power process 6 after that. Tell me an existing condition. Tell me how you've handled it. And then further along, because the idea was there that still pre-clear should be able to run power processing better, or could run power processing better, yet another process was put in the lineup of power processing to further enhance the running of power processing. And this is called the source process. And this also follows the idea of increasing the ability of the pre-clear to spot incidents and to spot whatever is there that causes them to act a certain way, feel a certain way, or had any effect on them. The commands of the source process are, tell me a source. And having gotten the answer, tell me about it. And then tell me a no source. And then having gotten the answer, tell me about it. And these are run alternate and repetitive. Now, part of the end result of this will be that the pre-clear will be more in present time, colors will seem more vivid, the room will seem brighter. The pre-clear will actually voice that. It's very interesting to see that result from this. I can recall one time in particular talking with somebody who said they'd been run on the source process at Flag for a number of hours, and the auditor just dropped it without getting this end result. So I actually ran this pre-clear on the source process. It didn't take all that much more, maybe 30 or 40 minutes, but how long it takes isn't the point. But then that result was actually obtained, and it's pretty remarkable to be able to guarantee that result from such a process. But that's what happens. Now, John McMasters pointed out, shared in a lecture, that Ron Hubbard demonstrated how the power process works for the pre-clear by showing him a bookcase with glass doors on the bookcase. And Ron Hubbard said to John, see, before running the source process, you look in there and you're actually seeing the image of the books on the glass. And then when you run the source process, you open up the glass doors, and now you're actually seeing the books, the objects themselves. Very good visual demo, and very interesting.